Welcome back. In this lecture, we're going to start delving into some of the different breeds of horses. And, just looking at the definition of what a breed is, of either a horse or a donkey. Again, these were, during, the last few thousand years as man has evolved the horse through artificial selection, they've bred these animals or certain breeds for specific purposes. So, we're going to talk about draft horses and draft animals. They were bred to be able to plow fields and pull carts and wagons and stuff like that, to our light horses and warm bloods that are more for riding, and then down to the ponies, which actually a lot of them had purposes, working in mines, pulling carts, or for smaller people or children to ride. So they all have kind of a trace back to a common ancestor, and with the breed, to be able to establish a breed, which some people still are trying to do to this day, these have to be characteristics that can be genetically passed on to their offspring, and they have to be unique to that breed. So that's why we've seen such a large number of horse breeds. Now, who kind of dictates the breeds, and that's these breed associations or breed registries. And they're the ones that kind of, they found the breed or founded the breed. They started the breed society or association, and then they actually keep records, breeding records, pedigrees, race records, stuff like that, and they kind of compile it all for that specific breed. And here's two examples: the AQHA or the Arabian Horse Association, just a couple of the many breed registries located throughout the world. Now, I did want to put one definition in here, and that is a grade. What does it mean when you have a grade horse? And basically that means that's a horse that's not registered. So if somebody calls it a grade animal, that means they haven't been registered with a specific breed registry, and typically grade horses are not worth as much as one that's been registered with its breed association. Now, in the world, there's over 175 horse breeds. I mean, that is a ton. So obviously, we're not going to be able to cover all of them in this lecture or this course. But you can go to this website, and this is the best website that I've found from Oklahoma State University here in the United States, that actually lists over 175 of the horse breeds, other livestock. You can find some of the donkey breeds that we'll talk about in another lecture on this website. So you can go there. It's on the course link, and you can go there and explore all these different horse breeds. I mean, there's a ton of them. Now, before we jump into individual breeds, we first need to talk about how they're divided up or classified, and that's along these four classifications. So there's the light horse, which sometimes we call hot-blooded. There's the heavy horse, which we either call cold-blooded or a draft animal. Then there's the warm bloods, and then the ponies. Now, when you hear hot-blooded, that's not the actual temperature of their blood or their body. That was more in reference to their behavior or demeanor. So early on, hot-blooded horses might have been seen a little bit more fiery or with a little bit more attitude, and cold-blooded was just a little bit more docile. Now, that's not so true today. Many of our light horse breeds are pretty docile, or as docile as some of the draft breeds. So, but that's just kind of where that probably originated from. Now, again, before we jump into breeds, one thing I felt that we had to explain is, what's a hand? Oftentimes you hear people say, well, that horse is 16 hands or over 17 hands or 10 hands. And you always wonder, what's a hand? Well, it's a unit of measurement that one hand is actually 4 inches. And you measure from the ground up to the height of the withers. And so this is how we measure a horse's height. So for every hand, you just add 4 inches. So for an example, if we said a horse stood 15 hands, we would multiply that by 4, and we'd get 60. So then it's 60 inches tall, or 152 centimeters to be exact with that. Now, when you hear 0.1, 0.2, or 0.3, that is just the number of additional inches. So if a horse was 15.1, that means it's 60 plus 1, so 61 inches tall. Or 0.2, if it was 15.2, you would add 2 inches. That means it's 62 inches tall, and so on. And you would never see a 15.4 because that 0.4 just means it's another hand size. So then that horse would actually be 16 hands. And then 16.1, 0.2, 0.3, then 17 hands, and so on. Now, starting with the light horse breeds, and these are just some averages. I mean, you're going to find light horses that actually weigh less than 900 pounds or are greater than 1,200 pounds, and you can see it in kilograms. You know, 14.2 is the minimum, generally, or 14 hands is the minimum, because anything under 14 hands we consider a pony. So 14 to 16 hands, but we're going to see here in a minute thoroughbreds stand well over 17 hands at times. And these horses were primarily developed for riding. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't light horse breeds that are multi-purpose. We see it here in the United States. We have a horse called the Morgan horse. It was made to pull carriages, to work on the farm, and to ride. So there are these multi-purpose light horse breeds, but primarily they were for riding. Now, before we kind of explore some of the light horse breeds, you have to go and start with the Arabian. This is one of the oldest breeds, most well-known breeds, and still really, you know, held in high regard in many parts of the world. This is just a wonderful animal, the Arabian horse. You can see some of the characteristics. Just a flashy breed. It's got that beautiful arched neck, you know, the dish face, the eyes, the ears. I mean, just everything about these animals are pretty wonderful, pretty fun to ride. You know, and pretty fun to work with. And this is the foundational breed for many, many, many of our light horse breeds, as we'll see in the next one. Now, our next most popular or oldest may be the thoroughbred, you know, what we think of as the thoroughbred. And, you know, the thoroughbred actually came from Arabian stock. But once the thoroughbred breed was, you know, established, then it went and helped found other breeds like the quarter horse and Morgan horse and or saddlebreds and some of these other breeds that we see in the United States and throughout the world. So the thoroughbred is also known as kind of a foundational breed. Now, the thoroughbred was bred really for endurance, you know, running long distances. So that's why we see, you know, in thoroughbred racing, they're running, you know, typically with a mile or a mile up to a mile and a half. And, you know, they were kind of bred for this endurance. And you could see some of the Arabian influences in them, but again, not quite as flashy. You don't see the broad chest. They're a little bit narrower in the chest and stuff like that. And then the next light horse breed that we'll talk about is the American Quarter Horse. And this is actually the most plentiful breed or largest breed in the United States with over 4 million quarter horses. And when we have, you know, 10 million total horses in the United States, almost half of them are quarter horses. So very, very large horse breed here in the United States. Wonderful animals. These animals were actually bred, you know, to be different from the thoroughbred, where they were actually, you know, used for sprinting, you know, really short races or fast moving animals. These animals are also known as to be really, really just gentle-natured. Quarter horses are just wonderful animals to work with and be around. And then they're also kind of known as the cowboy's horse. So they know they have this cow sense. And if you've ever seen somebody sorting cattle, that's typically a quarter horse. And you can see the quarter horse, you know, jumping from side to side, and they're kind of quick. And that's one of the many uses of this animal. And then we're not going to have time to jump into all these breeds, so I just listed a few other light horse breeds, but obviously there's many, many others. And the two that I really wanted to highlight from this list is sometimes people get confused between a saddlebred and a standard bred. Okay, easy way to remember this is saddlebred, you think of saddle, riding. This is a 5-gaited horse. This is a horse that was bred, you know, to have this nice, comfortable gaits that you could ride. Standard bred, actually think standard racing. They actually, to be registered early on, and this isn't true today, but early on, they had to trot the mile in 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Now, through breeding, they're much faster than that today. So, you know, they don't do that performance racing anymore. Now, to register with the Standard Bred Association, you just have to be from 2 standard bred parents. But it originally was a standard. You had to meet the standard to be registered to race. So that way you can remember it's saddle versus standard, and then you can see some of the others on there, but many, many, many others throughout the world. Now the next one is to go to the Gentle Giants, or what I like to think Gentle Giants. And if you've never worked with draft horses, they are wonderful, they're fun, they're kind of goofy a little bit, but they're just great, great animals, and they're obviously very large. You know, somewhere upwards of almost 1,800 pounds. They're very tall generally, you know, 17, 18 hands. And these were the workhorses. So these are the horses that were pulling plows, pulling carts. You know, that's what they were bred for, large, large muscular animals. And we're just going to touch upon a few of them. And you might as well start with the biggest one in the world, and that's the Shire horse, and it developed in England. And, you know, just a huge, beautiful animal. And they have this hair growing on their lower limbs, really long hair. And we call that feathering. So if you ever see that on a horse, it's just known as feathering. So you can use that looking at some of these others. Now the next one is, you know, pretty popular here in the United States, and it's called the Belgian, and it's from Belgium. So, you know, spelled differently, so make sure you remember that. And then they're really known for having this coat color, which we're going to jump into coat colors more next week, in next week's lecture. So, you know, sorrel and flaxen, those are terms that you'll get more of next week, and we'll talk about that. But again, they have a lot of feathering around their lower leg. And then the next one is the Percheron, and I chose this one to present because I've worked with Percherons again before, just like Belgians, and I haven't worked with Shires, but I've worked with Clydesdales too. And the Percherons just amaze me because they have this really thick neck. I mean, they are just, you can see where they would have that harness on, and they would pull, and they're just these huge, muscular, almost bodybuilders, and what we would look at in humans, type horses, and really beautiful animals. And then just some of the others you can see there, and obviously the Clydesdale is probably one of the most well-recognized draft horses, you know, with Anheuser-Busch here in the United States using them. You know, we see the commercials all the time, and, you know, really quite popular. But then some others, and then you see the Friesian on there. You know, that sometimes it can be referred to as a light horse or a light draft, you know, the Friesian type animals, because that's typically one that people ride quite a bit, but they can pull carts, which sometimes you see. Now, the next class is the warm bloods, and these were not brought about by crossbreeding, you know, hot bloods and cold bloods, you know, so don't think that's how they came about. They're actually just a separate class of animals, and these are really known as the sport horse lines, as you can see, and they're typically the sizes of our light horses, you know, or our larger light horses. And I'm just going to touch upon a couple of them. And first one is the Hanoverian. It's one of the most popular sport horses in the world. You can see them in the Olympics, you know, and they're just really beautiful, majestic animals. You can see them in competitions all the time, and really quite popular. And then the other one's the Trakehner. And it doesn't mean these animals can't do different events, but the Trakehner is typically known for dressage, which again, if you have never seen dressage, you know, please Google it, look at some of these animals. It's amazing what some of these riders can do with these animals when they're doing dressage. It's just, I'm always impressed when I see that. So typically a lot of those Trakehners end up in that type of events. And then just another list, not full list, but you can see really the European influence in a lot of those warm bloods. And that's where a lot of them originated in parts of Europe, and becoming these sport horses that you see on TV all the time in competitions. And then the final one, the little guys, I like to call them ankle biters. You know, they're always fun to work with, the ponies. And, you know, these animals, remember, they do have light horse type or light pony bodies, and these are the ones that you typically see children riding. And then they have draft type ponies that were, you know, again, these were ones, like I said earlier in the lecture, that would pull carts and mines. You know, they were built for purposes of getting in small spaces. Now, to be a pony, we generally consider that anything under 14 hands. So anything under 14 hands we'll tend to call a pony. And the first one I bring up is the Shetland, because it's, I know here in the United States and probably around the world, one of the more well-recognized, you know, from the Shetland Islands. And you can see, you know, they have two types, the light and the draft types, and generally, you know, pretty short, 46 inches tall compared to us. And then the other pony is the Welsh pony, and I bring this one up because this one typically tends to be a really good pony for young children or younger adults to ride. They've got a really good disposition. They've been selected and bred for that. So if you're really looking for an animal to buy your child, this may be one that you could look at, and you can see that youngster there jumping the fence, you know, on a Welsh pony. So then there's some other breeds, and the Pony of the Americas, you can see they're more of a colorful, flashy type pony breed, and some of the others, the Icelandic pony, that's where that other picture's from. It's another part of the world that they have lots of ponies running around. So, you know, there are many other breeds of ponies, and just wanted to touch base upon a couple of them. Now, in the next lecture, we're going to kind of jump into some of the differences in donkeys and asses and different breeds that we find throughout the world.